I was coming in very early this morning in a taxi cab, and the driver said, what are you doing in Washington? And I said, well, I'm involved in a conference on nuclear warfare. He said, oh, yeah, you for or against? And it brings the major question to my mind, and that is it really out of control? It really seems to me that you're playing a lot of games here with the destruction of the planet.
What can the world, or any nation in it, hope for if no turning is found on this dread road? The worst to be feared and the best to be expected can be simply stated. The worst is atomic war. The best would be this: a life of perpetual fear and tension, a burden of arms draining the wealth and labor of all peoples, a wasting of strength that defies the American system or the Soviet system or any system to achieve true abundance and happiness for the peoples of this earth. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed.
The decade of so-called détente witnessed the most massive Soviet buildup of military power in history. The scourge of tyranny cannot be stopped with words alone. So we have embarked on an effort to renew our strength that had fallen dangerously low.
Что внешняя политика США,
the foreign policy of the United States, is becoming increasingly imbued with the spirit of militarism. A first nuclear strike is something that is talked about as if it were absolutely matter of fact or routine.
The United States and the Soviet Union are bitterly hostile to each other and are on a course towards nuclear war. Both the United States and the Soviet Union are planning, training, arming, and practicing to destroy each other and all civilization. It is sometimes said that war is a natural condition of man. As a military man, I don't believe it.
You've got to have national defense. If you don't have defense, these other countries can come in. We'll be in just like we were in World War II. We'll be flat on our backs.
Скажите, пожалуйста, что вы думаете об... What do you think about nuclear weapons, nuclear warfare, atomic bombs? Я не думаю. I don't think about it. I don't want to think about it.
My mom once, she came into my room and she heard me talking in my sleep saying, no bomb, no bomb, no bomb. And I'm just worried that I might die, and I don't want nuclear wars to happen. If I did survive, even if there wasn't enough food, I'd probably kill myself, or I'd just die of sadness because all my family and all the people I loved would die.
Well, we've come a long way since the Navy began using these cannonballs. Nowadays, we are more inclined to use missiles such as this Terrier missile, which used to be on one of my ships that I commanded. The number of missiles and nuclear weapons in our naval forces, ground forces, and air forces growing every day. We have about 30,000 nuclear weapons in the United States military forces. The Soviets have about 20,000, total of about 50,000 nuclear weapons. And the number in both countries are increasing.
Can you imagine if they use the weapons we have? You destroy each other.
What's the difference? One superpower destroys and then the other superpower destroys. Probably one destroys a little less, the other a little more, but it is a total destruction anyway.
It could happen. It's a real possibility. I mean, it nearly happened with Kennedy and Khrushchev, and it could happen. I don't rule it out. I like to think leaders are sane enough to keep it from happening. But the history of the species since Tutankhamun suggests it could.
But I'm a historian, and I would say that the history of the human race is full of evidence that people have killed each other regularly over the centuries and even millennia of recorded history. They used different weapons. They killed each other with clubs and rocks, and now we're doing it with more sophisticated weapons, and even thinking about doing it with nuclear missiles. I think the man in the street ought to be damn well concerned about how to prevent these extremely and uniquely destructive weapons from being used. It cannot be left to the scientists. I think war is too important to be left to the scientists, just as it's too important to be left to the generals.
Switching command to internal.
Affirmative.
What do you think it could be, Al? Okay.
Skybird, this is Dropkick. There will be no authentication. Acknowledged now. Dropkick out.
No one likes us, I don't know why. We may not be perfect, but heaven knows we try. But all around, even our old friends put us down. Let's drop the big one and see what happens. We give them money, but are they grateful? No, they're spiteful and they're hateful.
Well, I think Russia has quite a few bombers. They're way ahead of us, and they just said on the news that we're behind in technology. But looking at this, I don't believe it.
One of the great myths that is being perpetrated on the American public is the story that the Soviet Union is ahead of the United States in military nuclear technology. This is just plain nonsense. The U.S. has always been ahead of the Soviet Union in its nuclear weapons technology. At one time, I was Deputy Director of the Central Intelligence Agency and was responsible for making the evaluations of Soviet missile and nuclear capabilities. A recent head of the CIA has testified that not in one single weapons category have the Soviets demonstrated technological superiority. Furthermore, we have more strategic nuclear weapons than does the Soviet Union. But you would never hear this because the myth of U.S. inferiority is being spread to try and panic the public in the United States.
National defense, as we see it today, is slipping. The articles you see in the papers and other news media say that we're losing our advantage over the Russians.
I definitely think that we should have the defense. Russia's got it. And I love this job.
We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
I think they should be particularly proud as this great warship is launched. President Reagan is determined to achieve full partnership between the public and private sector as we work toward rebuilding America's military strength. The Soviet military power continues to grow in every category of arms. It's clear that we have to respond to this threat. We live in a great and free country only because our forefathers were willing to wage war rather than to accept the peace that spells destruction.
There's always the scare words are being used about the defense, and the people running it tend to get what they want.
Yes, sir.
Take the number of nuclear submarines. I'll hit right close to home. I see no reason why we have to have just as many as the Russians do. After, at a certain point, you get what that word sufficiency. What more? What's the difference whether we have 100 nuclear submarines or 200? I don't see what difference it makes. You can sink everything on the ocean several times over with the number we have, and so can they. I think we're overarming altogether because here you have a situation where as weapons get more powerful, more destructive, then we need more. And something seems to be illogical about that proposition.
In other words, it's a chump's game. You can spend all of these additional billions of dollars, and the best you're going to hope for is that you won't be much worse off in terms of national security. And that's true of both sides. That's why arms control is in the interests of both sides.
Asia's crowded, Europe's too old, Africa's far too hot, and Canada's too cold. South America stole our name. Just stop the big one, there'll be no one left to blame us.
This is the Alternate National Warning Center, and we're located in the Federal Regional Center, and we're located near Olney, Maryland. We are approximately 30 feet underground in this room at the present time. We use the clocks here, the digital readout clocks, in case of an accidental missile attack, whether it be one of our own or whether it be an enemy missile launch, accidental missile launch, to provide the area, the time of the expected impact in their local time.
Do you think it'll make them feel any better?
Well, there are an awful lot of people who don't know about the Greenwich Mean Time or Worldwide Communications Time. And since we are dealing with the civilian population, why, that is the reason we give it to them in their local time.
If they took just one A-bomb, I read an article on that. If they took an A-bomb or one that we dropped over in Hiroshima, they dropped in New York, it could kill 5 million people in Manhattan, all right? And debris and that stuff would still be affecting 800 miles around in that circle. So it could kill many, many more. You see what I'm saying?
The guy in the street is a smart guy. He knows you can't fight and win a nuclear war. It's only the generals who are brought up to fight who think that you can survive. And the answer is the generals might live, but everybody else will be dead.
If we knew that a bomb was going to go off over this building in an hour, I would survive because I would walk. I can walk 5 miles in an hour, and I would get behind something so I didn't get caught with the heat flash. You don't have to get behind a concrete wall because the blast isn't going to hurt you out there. The radiation of the bomb from the explosion of the bomb is not going to hurt you. The only thing that can hurt you is the heat, and it comes in a quick flash of heat, and what you have to do is be shaded. That's all. Just as if you were trying to hide from the rays of the sun, you get behind something that shades you. Had enough brains to walk for an hour and get behind a lilac bush, we wouldn't be hurt by that nuclear weapon.
Well, I can't see how it would survive, you know, unless there'll be a telephone left hanging off a line or something. I mean, we really have made no provisions that I can think of offhand.
Currently, U.S. defense preparedness planning expects some 40 to 60 million prompt fatalities after a nuclear explosion. These fatalities will cause a very significant health hazard. Most of them will be located in the northeast corridor between New York and Boston and in Southern California. The
present plan to deal with this health hazard is to dig very long trenches with construction equipment, to requisition quicklime, and to bulldoze the bodies into these trenches, cover them with quicklime, and bury them. No attempt will be made to identify these fatalities so that next of kin could be notified. If the time were taken to do this, the health hazard that would be posed would be insurmountable. It's not without interest that 20 years ago, when a committee organized by the President studied the problem of providing health care in the post-attack era, their recommendation simply was to stockpile opium to make it a little easier for people to get over into the other world. That still is our primary response to a nuclear attack, our opium and morphine stockpiles.
In every family, 2 or 3 or more people were lost. 20 million of us died in the last war.
My colleagues and I are privileged and delighted to be able to address the people of the Soviet Union in this completely uncensored and unrehearsed television broadcast. Nuclear war is the #1 public health problem in the world today, facing us all, and perhaps constitutes the final epidemic for which the only remedy is prevention. A number of years ago, we made an analysis of a nuclear attack against Boston. Out of 2,875,000 people, 1 million were killed outright, 1 million were fatally injured, but of doctors, of the 6,500 doctors, only 10% remained alive without X-ray, without diagnostic equipment, without communication. A war without winners and dangers, not only our survival, but the very fragile ecology of our planet.
На этой табличке показано ожидаемое число жертв.
This table shows the expected deaths in the Soviet Union and Europe from multiple nuclear blasts, totaling 1,000 megatons. Children, adults, old people, healthy and sick people, pregnant women, and fetuses still in the mother's uterus would be the victims of the flames of nuclear war.
Well, nuclear war will have no winners. We believe that nuclear war will be the death of humanity.
Each of our strategic submarines can destroy 160 Soviet cities, and our new Trident submarines, each one of those will be able to destroy over 240 Soviet cities. No one can say we are not very powerful militarily. Now, it's very difficult and somewhat embarrassing for military men to accept the fact that we have no defense against Soviet missiles, and the Soviets have no defense against our missiles. We can destroy the Soviet Union, even though they destroy us first. There are no winners in a nuclear war.
Well, I'll tell you a scenario in which I think one side would win. If one side was able to expend say, a quarter of its nuclear strike capability and knock out so much of the other side's retaliatory capability that the other side didn't retaliate, they would have just won a nuclear war. Certainly, if a nuclear war had occurred over the Soviet attempts to put missiles in Cuba, there would have been a nuclear war with a winner, the United States.
What do you think is the prospect then for nuclear war?
Well, I think we'll probably destroy ourselves. I think that from a long-range standpoint, I'm talking about humanity, the most important thing we could do is to start in having an international meeting where we first outlaw all nuclear weapons to start off with. And I think this is a very propitious time when it's eating up so much, the military expenses are eating up it's completely unproductive and using up so much of the people's taxes. I think this is a fine thing that the president could do, and I urge you, in your capacity as a senator, to try to do something about that.
Rather than waste money on neutron and atomic bombs, the money should be spent on improving living conditions, houses, schools, raising the standard of living in peace.
I am aware you will film in a similar autoplan in the United States of America in Detroit. And so I would like to send my greetings to all my American colleagues and wish high productivity achievements. And to all of us, a safe, clear sky above.
It's been a good job for me. I've been here for about a year and a half. It's really great, really, once you get to know the people.
What would you say to a Soviet auto worker if you could just sit down and talk about nuclear war?
All I can tell them is I hope we can stay peace with them for a long, long time anyhow. So, let's stay all friends, you know. All this nuclear war is just going to cause a big hassle, I'll tell you, for everybody.
And in the center here, the green and white missile is an ICBM, Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, the Minuteman III. It's stored in silos all across the United States. And on the right, over here on the floor, is a Poseidon missile. They have a warhead of about 5 targets in the nose cone. And this one is going to be replaced by the new Trident that's just being built. The Trident submarine will be 560 feet long. It's 5 feet longer than the Washington Monument is high. Now, if you will come over here, I will show you how we launched the men to the moon.
I don't think that science and technology should ever be turned against mankind. It's very scary, and wars cannot happen today. People are born to live with hopes and talents that can benefit others. The Soyuz Apollo link-up made me feel good. It's nice to see we can get together.
If the technological competition continues, the ICBMs on both sides are going to become at the same time both more deadly to the other side's ICBMs and more vulnerable because the other side's ICBMs are becoming more deadly too. Now, what kind of a situation could that create? It could create a situation in which either side would feel that it had to strike first because otherwise it would lose its ICBMs and would never be able to strike second. So that both sides would have some pressure on them to adopt a launch-on warning policy. And that, of course, means that nuclear war is then resting on hair-trigger decisions by both sides.
London, boom, Paris, more room for you and more room for me. In every city, the whole world round will just be another American town. Oh, how peaceful it will be. We'll set everybody free. They all hate us anyhow. So let's drop the big one now.
I had quite a lot to do with this first atom bomb ever exploded on the sands of Alamogordo and then over Nagasaki in Japan. I didn't realize what would happen since then. We now have bombs which are 1,000 times more powerful than this bomb. There are tens of thousands of nuclear weapons between us and the Soviet Union. And if they ever are used, it will be certainly the end of the world as we know it. But that is a horrible perspective. And while I'm an old man, I don't care really about myself anymore. I have children, I have grandchildren. I want them to live. And what that means, that either we have to learn to live with the Russians, or we and the Russians will die at about the same time. And I'm all for living.
I want to say to the American people that they must fight together with us against the atomic bomb for peace. That's all.
I mean, when you stop and think about it, we are simply talking about if it escalates to the point that a lot of people think it will, that it's not controllable, and you can't limit a nuclear war, then that little rather lonely, fragile planet over there is on its way out of the ballpark. And I'm surprised that there aren't people who are angrier.
Your moral judgments can be a force for the survival of this planet. A courageous statement by you of your outrage at the approach of nuclear war might save us. Your silence will doom us. You are our only hope. If we are to survive on this planet, the nuclear arms race must be slowed, stopped, and reversed, and the time to start is now. Thank you.
Well, I think that a Russian kid, if he heard me say that, do you know any way of stopping bombs? Because if you do, you could tell my mom. I see. And I might ask him a question like, does your father own a 50 megaton bomb? Really, if he does, could you tell him to throw it away?
If you build up a lot of weapons, then you're saying, yes, it's possible to have a nuclear war. It may be okay. Maybe somebody can win a nuclear war. Who can win a nuclear war? No more children, right? That's the end. Right.
The United States is the most powerful nation in the world. And in the next few months and years, probably the greatest debate in the history of man will be taking place in these buildings to determine whether or not we shall continue to increase our nuclear arsenal or whether we will reach a sensible arms limitation agreement with the Soviet Union. The people of the United States should participate in this historic event. To do so, you need information. For many years, we have been responding to fear. It is now time to respond to reason. Write to me, Admiral LaRocque, Box 141, Washington, D.C., 20044. You can make a difference.
But above all, the people. I like to believe that the people, in the long run, are going to do more to promote peace than our government. Indeed, I think that people want peace so much that one of these days governments better get out of their way and let them have it.